To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened. Ihei Dogen. As we saw in the previous video on Theravāda Buddhism, there are three main schools of Buddhism. These schools are Theravāda, Mahayana, Vajrayana. In this video, we will examine Mahayana Buddhism. While it is difficult to determine the exact date of the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism, it seems to have been some centuries after the death of the Buddha. The Buddha is believed to have died around 400 BCE, and the early texts based on the direct teachings of the Buddha, known as the Pāli Canon, are the texts upon which Theravāda Buddhism to this day has its foundations. It is believed that the Mahayana tradition developed out of this early form of Theravāda Buddhism sometime between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE. What were the differences, and why did Mahayana Buddhism emerge? Mahayana Buddhism was a response to what was perceived as the elitism of the Theravāda tradition, particularly the Theravāda's monastic tradition, which focused most on intense meditation and ascetic practices. Mahayana Buddhism sought to make the teachings of the Buddha more accessible to ordinary people, not just to monks and nuns. It is best understood as a school of Buddhism that teaches that all people have the capacity to become awakened and realize the nature of reality. Mahayana Buddhism also emphasizes compassion on the path to enlightenment. This is best illustrated by the Mahayana ideal of the Bodhisattva, of the enlightened being who postpones their enlightenment for the salvation of all beings, not just humans, but animals as well. Important too is that while Theravāda Buddhism recognizes only the Pāli Canon as being the true teachings of the Buddha, Mahayana Buddhism includes texts called sutras as also the true teachings of the Buddha. Many of these sutras are known to have come into existence long after the lifetime of the Buddha, but are still considered to be the recorded words of the Buddha. These sutras contain teachings on a wide range of topics, including ethics, meditation, and the nature of reality. The most well-known collection of Mahayana sutras is the Lotus Sutra, which is considered to be one of the most important texts in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition. Other important sutras include the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra. As well as these sutras, Mahayana Buddhism also includes other texts such as treatises, commentaries, and histories. These texts were written by Buddhist scholars and monks, many of which are recognized as having attained an enlightenment equal to that of the Buddha himself, and thus speak and teach with an equal authority. Mahayana Buddhism spread to China in the 1st century CE, during the Han dynasty. The spread of Mahayana Buddhism to China was helped by the translation of Buddhist texts into Chinese. The most well-known of those who brought Mahayana to China around the 6th century was the Indian Buddhist monk Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma was an Indian prince who renounced his royal status to become a monk and traveled to China to spread the teachings of the Buddha. Bodhidharma is revered as the founder of Chan Buddhism, a further development of Mahayana Buddhism. Chan Buddhism, though based on the teachings of Bodhidharma, was directly influenced by Chinese Taoism and would come to be known as Zen Buddhism when it spread to Japan. Bodhidharma taught a form of meditation called wall gazing, which involved sitting in meditation facing a wall and focusing on the present moment. Mahayana Buddhism itself spread from China to Japan in the 6th century. During the next 600 years, Mahayana Buddhism spread throughout Japan and various schools and sects were established. 2 schools of Mahayana Buddhism were established in Japan in the 12th century. The first was the Tendai school, which based itself on the Lotus Sutra and on the idea of the One Vehicle, which taught that anyone could attain enlightenment through a deep understanding of the Lotus Sutra. What does the Lotus Sutra teach? The Lotus Sutra teaches that the Buddha's true nature is eternal and that he is present in all things. It teaches that the ultimate goal of the Buddha's teachings is the attainment of Buddhahood, a state of perfect enlightenment, and that all beings have the potential to achieve this state. The Lotus Sutra teaches the importance of compassion and the idea of selflessly helping others without seeking reward or recognition. It also introduced the concept of skillful means, the idea that the Buddha used various methods and teachings to help people according to their individual needs and capacities. As we will see in our next video on Vajrayana Buddhism, this idea of skillful means in teaching the path to enlightenment would express itself in Tibetan Buddhism as crazy wisdom. The second school of Mahayana Buddhism to become established in Japan was Zen Buddhism. As we have seen, Bodhidharma introduced Chan Buddhism to China in the 6th century. It developed in China as Chan Buddhism and eventually made its way to Japan in the 12th century. Zen Buddhism was introduced to Korea around the 6th century and continued to develop there. Zen Buddhism has had a complex and varied history in Korea, with periods of both flourishing and suppression. Zen is an important part of Korean culture and, like Japan, is practiced by many people there today. Over many years, Zen Buddhism also spread to other countries apart from China, Japan and Korea, including Vietnam, Taiwan, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia. Zen Buddhism emphasizes the practice of meditation and the cultivation of mindfulness as a means of spiritual awakening and liberation. It is known for its focus on the direct experience of the present moment and the cultivation of a clear and unobstructed mind. Zen Buddhism began to gain popularity in the West in the 20th century, following World War II. After the war, many Westerners became interested in Eastern philosophy and religion, with Zen Buddhism gaining a significant following in the West. Zen Buddhism also began to have an impact on artists, writers, and musicians in the West, particularly in America. From the 1950s onwards, Zen Buddhism has had a significant influence on the Beats. The Beats were a group of writers and artists known for their exploration of spiritual and philosophical themes. Many of the Beats, including Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, were profoundly influenced by Zen Buddhism. Avant-garde musicians such as John Cage, an experimental American composer, were also deeply influenced by Zen Buddhism. Cage was a serious student of Zen Buddhism and was particularly influenced by Zen's teachings on emptiness and the importance of the present moment. There were others as well. They included Robert Aitken, an American Zen teacher and writer who was influential in the spread of Zen Buddhism in the United States. Philip Glass, an American composer who was influenced by Zen Buddhism and other Eastern spiritual traditions. John Diodolori, an American Zen teacher and photographer who was known for his photographs of the natural world. Alan Watts, an English philosopher and writer, was known for his writings on Zen Buddhism and other Eastern spiritual traditions. Zen Buddhism has continued its impact on Western culture to this day and continues to be an important source of inspiration for many artists and creative thinkers. The Zen Buddhism that spread to the West from the 1950s onwards, particularly to the United States, is known today as American Zen. Today in the United States, there are many Zen Buddhist centers and sanghas, communities of Zen Buddhist practitioners across the country. In fact, Zen Buddhism is now considered to be an important part of the spiritual landscape of America. As we have seen, Zen has become the most prominent of all the schools of Mahayana Buddhism. But what is Zen? What does it teach? And how does it differ from the main body of teaching of Mahayana Buddhism? There are two main schools of Zen Buddhism. They are Soto Zen, Rinzai Zen. The main difference between these two schools is that of sudden or gradual enlightenment. Rinzai Zen teaches that enlightenment is not a gradual process and it brought about suddenly, usually as a result the breaking, though, of a spiritual, mental or emotional crisis. Whereas Soto Zen teaches that enlightenment is achieved only gradually and through a consistent practice. Let's first look more closely at Rinzai Zen. Rinzai Zen originated in China and was introduced to Japan in the 12th century by the Japanese monk Eisai. Eisai returned to Japan after studying Zen in China and established the first Rinzai Zen temple in Japan called Kenninji in Kyoto. From this initial temple, Rinzai Zen spread throughout Japan and became one of the most influential schools of Buddhism in the country. Rinzai Zen is best known for its practice of zazen, sitting meditation, and the use of the keisaku, or encouragement stick that is struck on meditators' backs as a way of helping them to maintain focus and stop them from falling asleep during meditation. Rinzai Zen is also known for its use of koans, paradoxical riddles or stories, to help practitioners realize enlightenment. Here are some examples of Rinzai koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your original face before your parents were born? Show me your original nature. What is the color of wind? What is the true nature of the ox? Koans are not meant to be solved in a logical or intellectual way, but rather are used as a way to challenge the assumptions and conditioned patterns of thought that prevent us from realizing our true nature. Working with koans is often a central part of the Rinzai Zen meditation practice and can be a powerful way to break through intellectual and emotional barriers and awaken to a deeper level of understanding. This breakthrough is to bring about the sudden achievement of the enlightened state. The second main school of Zen Buddhism is Soto Zen. Soto Zen also originated in China. The school was founded by Dogen Zenji, a Japanese monk who studied Zen in China in the 13th century and brought back the teachings to Japan. Dogen Zenji was not only a monk, but also writer, poet, philosopher, and founder of the Soto school of Zen in Japan. Dogen is considered one of the most important figures not only in Zen Buddhism, but also in Mahayana Buddhism as a whole. Dogen's seeking for enlightenment was fueled by one burning question. If, as the Buddha says, all beings are already Buddhas, already enlightened, what is the point of spiritual practice? Put very simply, the answer that he came to after many years of searching was this: practice is enlightenment. This conclusion informed the school he founded, Soto Zen, and all of its teachings. A good example of this is one of Soto Zen's practice of meditation called shikantanza, or just sitting. In this form of Soto Zen meditation, there is no object of meditation at all. All one is instructed to do is just sit in an alert manner. Shikantanza is also referred to in the Zen tradition as zazen. Dogen often stressed the critical importance of zazen as the central practice of Buddhism. Dogen considered shikantanza or zazen to be identical to studying Zen. He is quoted as saying, "Studying Zen is zazen." Dogen said that shikantanza is to sit without thinking, simply aware of things as they are, beyond thinking and not thinking, and importantly, beyond the active effort not to think. This is because, as mentioned previously, Dogen had come to understand that practice itself was enlightenment. For Dogen, enlightenment is already always present. Therefore, the correct mental attitude for any meditation practice was one of effortless non-striving. The very core of the practice for Dogen was the complete casting off of body and mind. Therefore, Dogen felt that there was no need for any of the incense offerings, homage praying, penance disciplines, or silent sutra readings usually associated with Buddhist practices. According to Dogen, all that was necessary was that one just sit. It is hard to overstate the influence that Dogen has had not only on Zen Buddhism, but also on Japanese culture and aesthetics. Dogen's philosophy and writings have played a key role in the formation of the Japanese religious aesthetic tradition, as well as in recent decades beginning to be drawn upon more and more in the Western philosophical tradition. There are, of course, many Mahayana Buddhist schools outside of that of the Japanese Zen Buddhist schools. There is the East Asian Mahayana traditions, also known as Eastern Buddhism, which include China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam. There are other than those of Zen Buddhism. The Mahayana Buddhists in this area total around 360 million. There is also the Indo-Tibetan tradition, also known as Northern Buddhism, which include Tibet, Mongolia, Bhutan, Northern India, Nepal. These are other than those of Vajrayana Buddhists. The Mahayana Buddhists in these countries total around 18.2 million. The meditation practices of these large populations of Mahayana Buddhists across these many countries is difficult to summarize. However, some generalizations of practice can be made. Many of these meditation practices are based on those of early Buddhist traditions and include mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the unattractiveness of bodily existence, loving kindness, contemplation of impermanence, mindfulness of the Buddha. The text, Yogacarabhumi Sastra, considered the most comprehensive on Mahayana Buddhist practice, discusses numerous meditation methods and topics, including the 4 dhyanas, meditations, the different samadhi, blissful meditative absorptions, the development of vipassana, insight, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. A very popular Mahayana practice, which originated in very early times and continues to today, is to visualize the Buddha while practicing mindfulness. It is believed that this practice can lead one to feel that they are in the presence of the Buddha, and in some cases can lead to visions of other Buddhas and to receiving teachings from them. This type of meditation is taught in numerous Mahayana sutras, particularly in Pure Land sutras. Pure Land Buddhism is another school of Mahayana Buddhism which is popular in contemporary Japan and China. Pure Land Buddhism teaches that by reciting the Buddha's name, this can lead to a rebirth in the Buddha's pure land, as well as other positive rebirths. In the next video, we will look at Vajrayana Buddhism, which is most closely associated with Tibetan Buddhism. In Vajrayana Buddhism, there are numerous meditative practices that are sometimes considered as being categories of Mahayana meditation practices. These practices are often termed Buddhist Tantra or esoteric Buddhism and include deity yoga, dzogchen, Mahamudra, use of mudras, sacred hand gestures, and mandalas. In the next video, we will examine the third and final school of Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism, also known as Tantric Buddhism or Esoteric Buddhism, is a branch of Buddhism that originates in India and later spreads primarily to Tibet, Bhutan, and Nepal. We will examine Vajrayana's use of elaborate rituals, mantras, visualizations, and other techniques for achieving spiritual advancement and enlightenment, as well as looking into Vajrayana's strong emphasis on the guru-student relationship and the transmission of secret teachings and tantras. We will see that the ultimate goal of Vajrayana Buddhist practice is to achieve enlightenment in this very lifetime through the swiftest and most direct means possible. Tvameva bandhuscha Sakha